kinds of events we should be doing, because as a literary scholar, as a culture scholar, culture studies scholar, I know that when we look at art, when we look at literature, we mostly think about, we kind of like include mostly art created by women. So I am, in my research project, I'm focusing on folk songs like in UP and Bihar that are sung by women, among women, and kind of analyzing it and understanding how, them as a feminist discourse. So let's get back to this particular event. And so for this event, Open the Vent, Indian Women on Indian Men, we have today, I will be hosting this event, and I have 5 wonderful panelists, or 5 wonderful Indian women who are with us today, and we come from very different, experience, very different professional background. So this group is very diverse. The only thing that is common among us is that we all identify ourselves as women. We all identify ourselves as Indian. And why we are talking about Indian men, and when we are thinking about Indian men, many of you might be wondering, particularly those who identify yourself as Indian, men might be wondering about it, that, what are they going to talk about? What do they think about it? So just to assure you, and just to curb your anxieties, we are not talking about stereotypes about Indian men, whether they are good or bad. We are not thinking about all these characters that Shakti Kapoor played in Bollywood movies when we are talking about Indian men. And we are not thinking about Dilip Kumar and Raj Kapoor and Shah Rukh Khan either. And this is many of us, and I can definitely talk about Rima, say about Rima and myself. In our profession, we talk about these things, and we talk about gender issues, but we are not bringing too much out of it. We are focusing more on our own experiences, our own observations, and what stories we have learned about when we talk to other women, whether in personal space or professional space. And another thing about this idea of Indian man, we are not, when we think about Indian man, Indian women, we just think about some sort of, like romantic, sexual, marital relationship between these two people, identities. But in my own head, at least, I'm thinking about Indian men in different roles. What our experiences are in the workplace, at home, for example, I'm not married to an Indian man, so my husband is not Indian, but it doesn't mean that I cannot talk about Indian men, because I was raised by an Indian man. I have 2 wonderful brothers. I have brothers-in-law who probably don't know that I know more about them than they think I know about them, because I have a very close relationship with my sisters. So, and it is going to be, and we always talk about that. So what we are going to talk about, we have this conversation, as I said, while rolling rotis in the kitchen, in the shopping malls. It just like you guys don't know what we are talking about. So this is your chance to actually hear from us what we feel about you. And we are not claiming that, this is who you are. It is more about this is how you appear. So in that, think about this conversation in that way. And before I introduce my first guest, just one last thing, because when I think about Indian men and my experience with Indian men, I just think about it. We love people who are around us, and if I'm Indian, in India, then half, or actually more than half, because look at the demographic, more than half of the population around me, is basically Indian men. And among all the people we love, a lot of them are Indian men. And we influence them, they influence us. So it's important to talk about it. For me personally, two of the most important people who have had any influence on me, are my grandfather and my father. So I, very early on, like from my toddlerhood to like 10, 11-year-old age, I was influenced mostly by my grandfather. I feel like my love for books, what my profession, everything is linked with my relationship with my grandfather. And after that, my father, and he was very good father. I was privileged, and I can very confidently say I grew up like a, very much like a pampered princess. I was his pampered princess. And of course, and I was happy in that role until, of course, I rebelled against him because he gave me reasons to rebel against him. So, but still, a lot of gifts that I have received in my life, while I was thinking about this event, I was thinking, from these men around me, I still have some of most important relationships in my life with Indian men. Even though, my husband is not Indian, but there are other people around me. And particularly this gift of being candid about, being candid, being open, and being comfortable speaking my mind. That was the biggest gift I actually received, not from my mother, but from my father. So personally, this candid conversation is dedicated to my Abu. On that note, I'm going to invite our first speaker, Reema Ahmed. And the structure of this conversation is that I will ask our guests to just speak for 3, 4, 5 minutes about whatever they want to speak based on their personal and professional experiences with Indian men. And after that, in the second segment, we will I have some questions for the speakers. I would request them to respond to those questions, and then we will open the session for everyone, Indian men and Indian women, or non-Indian men and non-Indian women, to jump in and join in this conversation. So our first guest speaker, Indian woman, girlfriend, is Reema Ahmed, and Reema is a writer. She is a sexuality and intimacy counselor, a very novel and new thing in India. And so Reema is privileged in the sense that she can tell us a lot of stories. She has more direct, indirect experiences and observations about Indian men and women because of her role and her profession of being a sexuality and intimacy counselor. So Reema, floor is yours, and I'm looking forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Fozia. It's good to be here. Hello, everyone. Adab. So yeah, I mean, to begin with, I have this cue in front of me so I don't forget, because this is such a vast, unwieldy topic. And I have this tendency to sort of step on toes, which I don't want to be doing here, only gently, if at all. So I was asked to share observations on how men in India appear against the backdrop of the gendered space Indian society still is. Now, there are 3 ways I could respond to that. And I think it's important to respond to that in all the 3 ways that I know how, because Indian men is not like, it's not a homogeneous entity that you put in a pot, put a sticker on and say, Indian men, oh, ye to aise hi hote hain, aur ye hai, wo hai, they're all like this, or they're all like that, or they're all fabulous, Both things are just silly. It's ignorant to say something like that. So I'm going to respond to that first as a single divorced Indian woman in her late 30s. So, and as a mom, bringing up a young Indian man, he is nearly 13, stepping into that threshold where gender and sexuality and all of that become really pronounced in his life. And third, as in my capacity as a sexuality, intimacy coach, counselor, therapist, and also as somebody who has a background in comprehensive sexuality education as a trainer. So to respond to the first, how do Indian men appear to me as a single Indian woman who's been out on the dating circuit for the last 6-7 years? You guys don't look good. I'm really sorry, but I'm really sorry, but you guys do not look good. There's such a, and I'm not going to say things like, oh, everyone's like that and everyone's like that, but there is one word, that one feeling that kept coming to me as I moved from one dating experience to another, and not because that was the way I like things, but because, the experience is so limited. Limited is the word I'll use for Indian men, young men who are out there seeking relationships with Indian women, who are out there looking for maybe romantic relationships or, just sexual relationships. The feeling, overall feeling, is how limited they are in their own understanding of how our cultural, our sociological, our conditioning how it has affected them in the way they behave inwardly and also outwardly, especially in terms of being explicit about what they want from a relationship, what they're seeking, what they're looking for, what is it they do not like, what is it that they like, and what is it that they emotionally really want. What I noticed over and over again was this emotional disconnect of Indian men, of all the Indian men that I met. I can safely say all met romantically or on dating sites or had relationships with, of how disconnected they are with their own sense of self. And they're just they're like a woman. Some of them will be like, oh, I like her, she's smart, she's sexy, and she's intelligent, which is like a good combination. Good to have someone around like that. And they'll just start off without setting something which I think is so important in the whole dating scene: intention. There's hard.
Rima, looks like your microphone is your screen is frozen.
Just jumping in if they find someone who's attractive. And what that does is it leads to a lot of hurt, it leads to a lot of misunderstanding, because if two people are not on the same page, and they're not on the same page even within themselves, messes are going to happen. So needless to say, I've managed to wade my way through a lot of those messes, and I kept having these conversations. Thankfully, I was able to push through and have a very in-depth conversations to all of these men that I met, because I found, as a researcher, as a writer, and also somebody who's like a trainer and a therapist, I needed to know what was going on. There is this lack of safety that they feel in being who they really are. It could be because of the way men are brought up, disconnected with their emotional selves, not allowed or not encouraged to be or appear a certain way. And also just very afraid, and I can safely use that word, especially educated intellectual men who are like working as maybe journalists or writers, very afraid to appear a certain kind of man, especially if it's a woman like me who's across the table. Oh, ye to feminism wali hai. So, most of the time they'll not say what they're really thinking and not enter into difficult conversations just because they want to avoid any sort of labeling or any sort of discomfort. So what that does is it leaves things on the surface. And I've really struggled to find people who I can deeply engage with at not just a sexual, but an emotional and intellectual level, where you are two human beings who are able to have difficult conversations. So yes, limited in terms of their own awareness, emotional awareness, in terms of their needs, and also in terms of what they're willing to give and take in relationships. It's just very casual, very hum-ho, and it's just very deeply annoying and dissatisfying. At this age, you don't want to be fooling around. You just, you want, if you like someone, you want to be able to say it, and you want someone who's able to say the same things to you. So yeah, so to all the men out there who are listening, this is not a judgment. I love men. I thrive on the beauty of them. I actually do. I'm a poet. I write poetry on the male form. I write, poetry on the beauty that men bring into our lives, because you know what, life would be so boring. I mean, if I didn't have men in my life, I don't know, I maybe wouldn't write any poetry. And and the second way that I can respond to this is, as a mom who's bringing up a young child who's nearly 30, is that there is so much scope in terms of changing things within all the systems that men and women go through. When I say systems, I mean the system of first the family, and then the school, then higher education, and then, the professional, the workforce system. There is so much scope to change things, to bring in honesty, to bring in authenticity, to bring in and allow, even celebrate vulnerability of emotion, of being. There is just so much scope to do that if only we allow that to happen, if we encourage that to happen. And every also allow me a lot of
Rima, your microphone is seems like you're frozen again. So I am not sure what's happening with Rima, and so we will see. I mean, she can, she will come back and continue with what she's saying. I did have a lot of questions for Rima. So one exercise that we are doing is that when we are talking about men, actually it allows us to think about and reflect on our interaction and with men. So when Rima, your microphone is off.
Yeah, hi, sorry. So sorry. Yeah. I was so afraid of this to finish. Well, and just there's so much opportunity to break existing systems of behavior, existing systems of masculinity where men have been taught to behave a certain way. So we will just continue this. This is like very conversation, the structure is very conversational. So we will go back to Rima. And as the moderator here, I also have some questions for ourselves as well, for Indian women as well. So when we think about, when we remember, when we think about our experience and our interaction with Indian men, so we are also like, one side who's interacting with Indian men. And I have thought a lot about it, and I feel like, the way they are, social cultural construct, the same way we are also social and cultural construct. The way they are trained and not trained in some ways, we are also trained and not trained some ways. So just to let you know that at this point, the first part, I just, just vent it out. That's the first. So vent out is the first section of this, and after that we will reflect on what we said during the vent out, segment, and then we will have a discussion here. And I have some very specific questions for Indian women speakers who are here. So before we go there, let's just go to Navjeet. Is that okay, Rima? Yeah, sure. Just about to share my experiences as a therapist counselor.
Yes, actually do that. No, actually you do that, Rima. Then I'll go to, because that was my question. Talk about not only personal experience, but what you learned, because you talk to men as well, right?
Men as well. I do talk to more men actually, and that's the whole maza masala of it, if I can put it like that. Because when I first started my practice, I was not expecting so many men to write to me. I was not expecting so many men to write to me in such a professional, polite way, where they're like, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for existing and doing what you do, because I don't know who I can talk to. And that brought in so much vulnerability. There are so many men out there who are seeking to improve their relationships, who are seeking to improve the way they are around the women that they love. But they have very few open, warm spaces where they can go without being judged or without being called out. And I'm just so grateful that I got to where I am today, because the kind of people I meet, people whose marriages are on the verge of breaking, people whose intimate relationships have been disrupted, or people who've gone through abuse and, rape in childhood and don't know how to connect with their bodies, or are just don't know how to recover, or depression, or even just physical things, and just this sort of shame and stigma on how to talk about it. So when I opened up this space, I realized that, they appear a certain way because they've been taught to appear a certain way. And they have imbibed and gone on to be that way because it also suits them most of the time. It is advantageous for them most of the time. But where it's disadvantageous is where areas are not in private spaces. It becomes very disadvantageous because you don't know how to talk to your partner when you have a problem. You don't know how to ask your friend, what, I've got ED, I don't know what to do about it. You don't know how to sort your emotional, psychological issues because, let's be honest, women, the way we sort of bond together is very different from the way men bond together, from what I've understood from my experience as a therapist. I'm not just saying that as a layperson. Because I've asked all of these men, so have you talked to anyone about this? Have you shared this? I said, kisse baat kare? They'll make fun of me. I can't go tell my, bro gang. They'll be like, whatever, pop a pill, you'll be fine. And, so it just made me, in the beginning, it made me very sad. And then I was like, you know what, this is your opportunity and this is your window to make any change that you can. And what came across was stories upon stories of emotional wreckage. Men just emotionally wrecked first by their families, and then by the systems they are in, be it the system of the school, be it the system of the college, be it the system of, the professions they are in, and just very, very limited and pushed to react a certain way without understanding. And in the kind of damage that's causing and the kind of havoc that's bringing into their lives. So, I see these three different kinds of men, and which is why I thought it was important to share all three, because all three are different perspectives, but they're part of the whole. The men who are aggressive, non-committal, or unclear about what they want. Young men who are growing up to be either A or C, and C who are blue, who want help, who actively seek, who are willing to understand.
Oh, hi, thank you. You're again frozen, but we, got the point. And again, we know as Indian women who you are based on, how you appear, how we interact with you, what we receive from you. So we'll come back to this. And now I'm going to go to Navjeet Kaur. And Navjeet, hi, somebody should. Yeah, so Navjeet, you're a scholar, a PhD student in the anthropology department at Princeton University. She also worked with me as my teaching assistant when I was teaching this course, Gender, Sexuality, and Feminisms in South Asia. And she has taught in some colleges in Delhi as well. She is originally from Amritsar and is lived along her adult life in Delhi. The reason why I'm saying it, because that gives her a very different kind of context and different kind of space where she either had experienced or she observed Indian men. And I believe that context is very, very important, because when you are from Lucknow, and the way you are seen in Lucknow and the way you interact in Lucknow, and then when you go to Delhi, and it changes a little bit how you are seen and how you act. And my question is for Navjeet, that we have already discussed multiple times, is that Navjeet, I see her as next generation. So just by the fact that she's from Amritsar and she was in college and in Delhi, and she had freedom, no one was watching her, she could do whatever she could, her friends could do whatever they could, was not a privilege that I had growing up in Lucknow. So it was something we longed for but didn't have it. And then automatically we think, oh, maybe that must be a better situation for you. That must make you more empowered, not only in your life, professional life, but in terms of your interaction and your power negotiation with men around you. And Navjeet is unmarried and a very outspoken, intelligent woman. So Navjeet, there you go. I am really curious about what you guys are doing. Are you all having it better than us or not? Maybe not.
Thank you so much, Fawzia, for this very generous introduction of yours. And I also first congratulate you for bringing a panel and a discussion on issues of intimacy. I think because when it comes to issues of women, we talk about rights and opportunities, which is definitely something which a generation before us is feminist and our mothers and all that, I think have contributed a lot to getting us where we are. But it is also pertinent to see that has the domestic space, whether it has taken the form of marriage or live-in or just like, a friendly camaraderie of sharing a flat together, does that still sort of, I don't want to use the metaphor of battle or something, if it puts the two genders at war with each other, but it is crucial to ask ourselves that how much free or how much do we feel that we inhabit the domestic space as we would like to inhabit as individuals, as thinking women, and so on and so forth. So from my experience, I can definitely tell you that once you make a shift from a very small town to a cosmopolitan city like Delhi, of course it adds and it gives you certain kinds of freedoms and opportunities which would not have been available to, let's say, where you stay. In the simple thing that you are not coming back home to your parents at a strict time, or they are not asking you, or you don't have to inform them that I'll be late today or I'll not be late today. So even within the space of Delhi, I'm not speaking from the perspective of a Delhi woman, but from the perspective of a woman who is quote unquote still has migrated from one city to another city. So definitely, it adds to the charm that, you can go out, you can sit at India Gate till like 10 p.m. and, there's not a call from your father that where are you, khana thanda ho raha hai, or something like that. That sort of really adds to the flavor of the college graduate student, which is there in a due north campus or in a south campus and so on and so forth. But having said that, it is also lateral to at that time checking out men or being with men or going out for dates, being set up for dates, and if things work out, because with each degree there also comes not only a certain professionalization, but these kind of cities also provide avenues where one or the other person can earn money, which might not be available, let's say, in a town like Amritsar. So economic independence also starts coming, that you are moving, and from there the other aspects also start. So at that level, imagine a woman who is getting money, who is becoming economically independent. One would think that the situation of love, or when it comes to like being in love, would be very different from the classic sort of rationality. Oh, women have to be economically independent and so on and so forth. Here is a woman who is economically independent. And in the case of the narratives of my friends in Delhi, sometimes earning more than the partner who they end up being with, in that kind of a scenario, you expect the domesticity or the intimacy or the questions of intimacy to be a little different, that you're not like your mothers and so on and so forth. And I say that with a huge respect, not that looking down upon my mothers and so on and so forth. But strangely, in my case, what I have observed is, and this is the strange part, which sort of always, that women also willingly try to take roles which otherwise on the streets and in public discussions they will be loathing and they will be speaking against. You see the same dynamics of how it is unfurling in the house. Not that I'm against that a man should not only like feminism is not only that, oh, a man also starts making tea, that's not. But the mere fact that the repetitive household nature, that a woman is also going to work, her boyfriend is also going to work, but she is the one who is waking with this, अरे maid आने वाली है, अरे तुमने वो कर दिया, अरे चाय बनाने वाली है, or something like that. Or even when a male person comes, her boyfriend comes and cooks in the kitchen, it's like, oh my God, he has cooked. But then that's the only assurance, I have cooked. But who's going to take care of the mess which you have made? That is sort of implicitly implied that sort of falls on the shoulders of the women. Not just that, I have also seen that, when sort of kind of fights will happen and so on and so forth, it is as if that, that woman is again in that very, very submissive role, where she is not being able to tell her boyfriend / live-in partner that what it is that she is going through. And there are calls being made to her girlfriends again in the middle of that, oh my God, this is happening and that is happening and so on and so forth. And this is despite the fact that we are talking about an economically independent women. And in some cases, like my girlfriends have been the ones who have been paying the entire rent, like despite that kinds of freedoms, what is very perplexing for me is not only that there is a certain social engineering both done for the woman and the man, that despite the quote-unquote material hierarchies they might break, which is economic independence, speaking in English, having those kind of opportunities, when it comes to the zone of domesticity, it is as if those same patterns are repeated, free in choosing their partner, and in fact, in nowadays situations, this is also coming that when parents are also getting okay with, okay, fine, you're staying with someone, you don't have to hide as much as like there was hiding in our times. Despite that being a revelation, despite things now being in public, or despite things being an open secret also, there is a strange way in some patterns which we would have otherwise thought have been guarded, are even repeated in the relationships of what you would say the millennial or the youth relationships. So that is sort of very perplexing for me. That. Thank you.
Thank you, Navjeet, for sharing about this. And I would just like to add a couple of observations myself to what Navjeet just said. I come from a very traditional background, and I wanted to kind of break that mold. And I actually had, as Navjeet said, had and still have great respect for wonderful housewives. My mom and my aunties were. I just thought that the effort and the time that they put into that role was not as appreciated, or even if it was appreciated, it did not give them, as much power as they should have. So I just I grew up thinking that, and I still think, and I'll make an argument for that later, that without financial independence and without sexual freedom, any concept of idea of freedom is kind of shaky. And so I'll just share my own anecdote about what Navjeet just said. So I decided, so as I said, my husband is American, and then I have been wanting to reconnect with India. So 2 years ago, I went to Delhi and rented an apartment and decided to just spend our summer there. And here, my husband does the dishes and do a lot of household work. But Indian man cannot take credit for that because he's Indian. He is American. He's half white, half Chinese. And so I am not used to taking care of the kitchen as much. I'm a wonderful cook. I boast about it. But the actual taking care of the household, it's just the other way around. I cook, but he does the dishes. So, but he didn't know how to take care of an Indian kitchen. So we hired maids. And maid would just come to me. And I would just my husband is just sitting there and kind of trying to talk to maid about what needed to be done. And I'm holding my computer sitting in the bedroom. The maid would come to me and say, Didi, ye aisa hona hai, wo kaisa hona hai, wo kahan hai? And I'm just I became so frustrated with this entire situation that, and I see here, I have a lot of girlfriends, and I will come to it when I talk to my American girlfriends, what they say about, their men and how they compare. And sometimes they actually say that, they have some other problems, which I see. So I will come to that. But I'm just saying this is internalized by women as well. And so this is something that we, again, I'll come back and I will also say where we lack. I will talk about it later. But now I go to Bhamini Shri, our third speaker. And Bhamini Shri has candidly described herself on the flyer, as you probably have seen, a working wife and an artist. So Bhamini, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fazia. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here. And it was so nice to hear Rima and Navjeet talk. And they just spoke so many things that I was thinking about before the panel discussion started. And when Navjeet mentioned about this fact of when the male of the, say, a relationship or the setup, if this person is cooking, who does the cleaning part of it? And, this was a very good part that was mentioned. So as you were saying, Fazia, that I have candidly mentioned my title as a working wife and a visual artist. So this working wife is, this is something which I also thought that it's very, it's bizarre. And as we were discussing, there is something called working woman and a housewife, and this is a mixture of both, and it's kind of very weird thing for me. So, I will tell you from my personal experience. I'm married now, and I have seen that transition happen from a working woman to a working wife, and how my experience with the rest of the world has sort of seen a change there. So, before marriage, I was never into cooking. Even now, I don't cook. I don't like to do it. I don't do the groceries. I really don't enjoy doing it, and I'm not good at it also. So before the wedding, it was always okay, she'll learn. Seekh jayegi. Jab zarurat padegi, seekh jayegi. After marriage, when I don't do that now also, and my husband takes care of that part, he does the clean, a limited part of the cleaning, and he does cooking, and he does the grocery, he does all the shopping. So the experience of the rest of the world with the fact that, husband is doing this, and why isn't the wife doing, is more, generates more curiosity to the rest of the world than in my own mind. And that's kind of, some time back, I started questioning this. Am I not doing enough? Am I not contributing enough in the household chores? Or should I learn cooking? Like, what do I do? How do I cope with this? And that was actually a difficult time for me, because I had started questioning my own self, that and then I realized that, what I am doing is I'm just giving up, that okay, this society wants you to behave in a certain way, and this is why you are taking this up. So then I was like, no, I don't want to do this, I will not do it. And I had a conversation with my husband about it, that this I just don't like. So and he was really supportive in this. So that is, I think, one part that I wanted to mention about. And my experience on how my experience with the rest of the world has changed after marriage, and especially in the Indian society situation, is what I'm talking about. So till the time I was unmarried, I don't think anybody from my family, or anybody from the people who I know, or anyone would ever ask me about my sexual life. Nobody. That was non-existent. It was not there, or it was taboo, or it was something nobody ever talked to me about this. Now, suddenly, all of a sudden, I just see that everybody has got the right to talk to me about my sexual life. Even the people who I really don't feel comfortable talking to, even about my work, they would also just come and talk to me about my sexual life. Why? Like, when did that happen? Just because there was this a function of, what is this? So it was actually very, very weird, and it still is kind of weird for me. I'm still coping with the idea of how the world changes. It doesn't change inside. So I don't really know the experience with a non-Indian man, but it doesn't really change before you're married or after you're married, even to some extent between the partners. But yes, between you and the rest of the world, it has certainly changed, and in not a very, very good way. So, but what is more important is, I think, the relationship that you share, the kind of compatibility you share with your partner, your core family, who you look up to, or who you can talk to on a daily basis. This can be your own side or your partner's side. So I think that is really important. And in that way, I think that I get that support system, I think both the sides. I get that support system. But yes, a lot of people do not get that support system also. So the world drastically changes for them.
Thank you, Bhamini. And I have some very interesting comments I'm looking at, and questions in the chat box by the audience as well. And I will incorporate some of them in what I'm saying. And I myself was thinking about it. During, in my mom's or my grandma's times, women were raised in certain way, very clear that the expectation from them was primarily to be trained and to be able to take care of the households, and then men were raised in a way to go out and make money and provide for the family. And what happened that during my generation or a generation before, in India, at least like Indian middle class started raising their daughters with this expectation that they should go to work, they should also get like first division, padhai bhi achhi karna chahiye. And then, for example, I didn't grow up doing any household work. So when we are growing up, my experience and my brother's experience was not that different. As I said, I was more pampered by my family, and particularly my father, than my brothers. But it was still, so what is happening that, you are not trained in doing household chores either. But once you are married, when you go and live with your husband, then what happens that he's not trained, you're not trained. You have a job and he has a job. But it just like this expectation is, or you just like, this household is yours and you have to take care of it. And that can get very frustrating for many of us, and that is leading us in this situation that a lot of very qualified women who cannot manage both household and career, since it is still expected more of men to provide, and that's an issue, and I feel bad men about that. Because of that, then they are leaving workforce. So very qualified, educated women are leaving professional workforce because of this situation, and they're not happy there. And then, of course, domestic labor comes in, and somebody here said that, what about domestic labor? Yes, even if they have that domestic labor, as I said in my case, when I was living in, around Haus Khas 2 years ago with my family, 2 kids, my husband and me, but it is still the woman's job to actually provide guidance and get that domestic help to do, to work and to be productive and supervise and manage the domestic help. So that is an issue, mainly because we are less competent, probably. I'm just putting it out there. I don't know. I have not done enough studies, but we are less competent in taking care of the household than our mothers, but we are pushed to do that. And our aspirations matter, our professional aspirations matter less to men around us, but sadly, they matter less to ourselves as well. So to me, as a woman, as a feminist woman, that is the biggest kind of loss, that we have lower expectations of us in professional field and higher expectation of us in the domestic field, because people around us think the same way. That is one point. The other point, and Swati has also said that, we have started raising our daughters differently, but not our sons. And this gap is coming, from that as well. And, and I'll come back to, women, Indian women, whether they want to work or don't want to work, whether their men want them to work or not. But before that, I will go to Megha Nandi. So Megha, hi Megha.
Hi.
Welcome, Yeah. So because we are talking about husbands and dating partners, and so again we are kind of slipping into this very heterosexual gendered space. So it's good that Meg is here to make intervention, to remind us that that is not true for all of us. That is not true for all of Indian women. Megha is a queer rights activist and a graphic designer. Megha, floor is yours. You speak for yourself.
Thank you, Fazia, and thank you everyone for joining us. And I've been working from last 3 years for LGBTQ in Lucknow, and for generating awareness about LGBTQ issues. So most of my interactions were with Indian men, and I'm going to offend a lot of people right now, but Indian men can't stand the fact that a woman can live without them. They don't accept this fact. They can't. They literally can't. They think it's impossible. Okay, and most of the time I am asked this question, as I'm a out lesbian woman. So most of the time when I'm holding any event, organizing an event, and a person comes up and just asks me, how do lesbian have sex? That's the first question. And they can literally ask anything about how it was tough for me, how we date, but the first thing they do is just to objectify us. And that's I feel they can do a lot better. Right. And I had most of the terrible experiences. I've been dating, and most of the time, my girlfriend was asked earlier, I was dating someone, and a guy came up in the cafe and just told her, you should try men. So, how do you demonizing comments and things we have to face just being a lesbian? It's first, if you are a woman, second, you are a lesbian. So it's you have to fight against this heteronormative society and with that patriarchy. So it's kind of tough for us. And there are many issues. Like many people think we hate men. Okay, men think we hate them. We want to be like them. That's why we are dating women. No, that's not the issue. If we would have hated men, we would have not been like with a good. We had good friends, right? We love father. Okay. So there are many things. So they just don't accept the fact. And one more thing that I've seen in Indian men that they just don't like the fact that a men can have that feminine side. They think being feminine is wrong. So which is a very problematic thing, I feel. That's it.
Thank you, Megha. We will come again. I will, soon open the, this conversation to the audience as well. And so it's important that we, especially, having Megha here, that it's not that only people who are romantically and sexually interested in men are interacting with men or have to deal with men or want to have positive relationship with men, because half of the people identify as themselves as men, and we are interacting with them. And before I ask my questions and invite the audience to join in that conversation, we have our fifth speaker who couldn't join us from the beginning, but I wonder if she is already here, Ayushi Sinha. So she is an Indian American undergrad student. So an Indian American student, and then she was enrolled in my gender and sexuality and feminism course and wrote her final paper on this idea of Lakshmana Rekha between private and public, which is there in all societies, but which is more prominent in our society. And I wanted Ayushi, and I still want Ayushi to be to talk about this, because she did some research and basically she said something, or she brought in something that I am already aware of, because even though my own husband is not Indian, but I have lots of Indian girlfriends. Most Indian girlfriends have Indian husbands, and I see that dynamic. So Shalini, can you just confirm whether Ayushi is here or not? And meanwhile, one more thing I wanted to... she's not here yet. So once she is here, please, please let me know. Yeah. And one thing that came out, was brought up in this conversation as well, or became evident in this conversation as well, something that I have noticed, particularly, living here in America and mostly interacting with non-Indian like families and women, I feel like one thing we have really positive, like Indian women have really positive, is this having a higher level of ease and comfort when talking to among ourselves, like this, like woman to woman conversation, as Navjeet said, receiving this like midnight call from a girlfriend about something is going on. And as Bhamini said, even though that can be negative sometimes, but then people being too comfortable asking you kinds of private questions that you don't expect. And I grew up in a joint family setup. And I know that, so the space is very gendered. That's a problem. But that gendered space, which has less power in society, and that's why that the problem lies there. But it's a comfortable space. This sense of sisterhood I feel like, is a little more prominent, a little stronger among Indian women. This is something I'm just sharing my own observation with you, that this is something that I have noticed. And this is something that Indian men, it seems like, based on what Rima said, and based on, some of you kind of hinted that men don't have that space. Their space is gendered, our space is gendered, but Indian men don't have that comfortable space to have that therapy, like, some people who can do therapy. For example, I would go to my girlfriend, if anything, instead of finding a therapist. I mean, I know that, Rima, you are a therapist. I have Swati Desai, who is a therapist. But as an Indian woman, it is a bit uncomfortable for me. Again, the whole Lakshman Rekha talking about private with somebody you don't know. It's less comfortable for me talk to a professional about my personal issues than going to all these wonderful women who are around me. So this is the space that we are living in, and we kind of like need to be mindful about that, because we can take this into account when we are analyzing our own experience and men's experience. And so I have, let me just first look at, is there any not burning question, but there was a reminder, which I agree with. Ashok said that, isn't this conversation very urban? And yes, it has to be urban because it is happening on Zoom. So unfortunately, we are very aware of that. And I, as a gender sexuality studies scholar, I would be the first to want to understand that. And that was the reason I designed that course, because I thought that the discourses that we were engaging with in academia were very Western oriented, and I wanted the discussion about gender sexuality focusing on South Asia should situate the discussion within the cultural space and cultural history of India. But again, India is very diverse, and all of these women, I tried my best as the host and organizer and moderator of this panel, this conversation, I tried my best to keep it diverse, and that's why I reached out to women who kind of represent different segment of Indian society. But when it comes to level of formal education, and I must say formal education, because all these women who don't have degrees, I don't consider them not educated. Or all these women who are not working, I don't consider them not empowered, not feminist. But this is the limitation. People, who have certain level of education, who have access to technology. It is about class. It is about rural, urban. And I apologize for that, but we are at least aware of that. Again, to make that point about who is empowered, who is not, who is feminist, who is not. So I will give you just one example. And Navjeet said a lot of women, making more money than their partners and still don't seem to be empowered in private spaces. And which is unfortunate, very unfortunate. But, and in my own kind of like in my own family, the strongest woman I knew was my grandmother. Who was from a generation before my mother. I didn't see my own mother and my aunts as strong as my grandma was. And she did not have formal education. She was homeschooled, but she was highly educated and was a very good reader. So she was taught how to read Quran, how to read Urdu. She literally spent 6 to 7 hours every single day reading. So she was that educated, but she never went to school. So it is also how we see and categorize women, that itself is a problem. And Navjeet is an anthropologist. I have had privilege to talk to her multiple times, and we discussed that in rural areas, sometimes women can be more empowered. And particularly, I'm familiar with feminist movements in India, and our grassroots feminist movements did not come from women who go on TV and talk about feminism. It actually came out of tribal women taking charge of their communities in Rajasthan, in Chhattisgarh, and the whole movement actually in India, in comparison to many other places, actually came out of that. So I'm very proud of that as an Indian woman. So going back to my dadi, just one thing. So my dadi and my dada, they were, वो बात कर रहे थे और कुछ नोक झोंक हो रही थी, and my daddy was like very strong, and my daddy said something, my dada was not listening to her, and then I was like a college student and I just thought, this this like everyday scene. So मैंने अपनी दादी से कहा कि, and I call her Ammi, and I call my mother Mummy, and I call my dada Babu. So हमने उनसे कहा कि उफ़ अम्मी, बाबू आपकी सुनते तो है नहीं, तो आप क्यों झगड़ा करती हैं, इससे फायदा क्या है? And so my that generation, like my dada's generation, and we have to think about diverse cultural background. So they switched between Urdu and Awadhi, and men switched between Urdu, Awadhi, and English. So that was the linguistic landscape I grew up in. So my dadi, who had very good Urdu, she wrote. I learned Urdu from her. She read the whole entire Shahnama Islam, when I was a kid, and that's how I learned Urdu, not in a school. She looked at me. There was a pause, and then she said in Awadhi, "Bitiya, jeete to nahi, magar haro kahe mani." Basically saying, child, I did not win. Why should I accept the defeat? So this was my grandma, and I consider her a role model. So I am again saying our battles in private spaces are more important than public sphere battles, even though I would like you to talk about their experience with Indian men in workplaces. This is something, because I have very limited, when I go to conferences in India and when I go to conferences in America, my experience as a woman is very, very different and very, very interesting. And I have lots of anecdotes. However, I won't take much time. I want somebody else to talk about it. Ayushi is here. I can see Ayushi. Hi. Hello. So good that you are back. I hope your interview was good. Because of a very important interview, Ayushi couldn't join us from the beginning, but why don't you go ahead and talk about what you wanted to share, Ayushi?
Absolutely. So I'm one of Fazyaji's students and went to Lucknow with Fazyaji and Navjeet in the fall. As part of our gender and sexualities class. I guess some background on me. So born and raised in the United States, but both my parents, of course, were born and raised in India. And so my father is from Bihar. He grew up in Bangalore, and my mom is from Varanasi. And she grew up in Chhattisgarh. So that's a little background for, I guess, who I am and sort of why I am excited to be part of this panel.
So Ayushi, also talk about, what you observed, because we talked about it, that even when we leave India and go out, the reason why you are here, because we take India with us. I have not, taken the entire family with me, but I have taken India with me. And I can, even when I'm interacting with Indian men and American men, I have seen myself behaving differently, which is the weirdest thing ever. And I have had some very awkward moments because I'm doing it not consciously but unconsciously, and it seems like I'm discriminating one group for another. But the floor is yours, so I will let you talk. Ayushi, talk about a little bit about that, Lakshman Rekha that you observed in your personal observation in your family and among your relatives, Indians living in America, and what you concluded in your final paper. Yes,
absolutely. So for some background, I wrote a final paper in this class on the invisible, of course, Lakshman Rekha line that I've noticed between the public and private sphere. So this sphere of the home, what happens in the family, as well as what happens outside. So first, I was really surprised because growing up in the United States, I went to an all-girls school for 7 years, and feminism was almost shoved down our throats. But feminism in the United States is very public facing. It's like the Me Too, what happened, in the workplace for, a women engineer. I'm always told, like, we need more women in STEM. But something I was very surprised about through this class and our trip to Lucknow was so much of feminism in India, at least from my observation, happens in the bedroom. It happens in the home. It happens with the negotiations with the men, in the more like private and intimate parts of your life. So my specific paper was on the invisible, like Lakshman Rekha, and maybe how that is related to sort of reporting crimes of domestic violence in India. I looked at everything from Reddit posts to like women's magazines, and was and documentary filmmakers to better understand why are women, telling other women anonymously about their issues of domestic violence in the home. Why are they telling, like white foreign reporters and journalists about these issues in their homes, but they're not going to the policeman down the road and telling them about the issues in their home. And so I hypothesized that, of course, like gender, like there must be some sort of role of gender in when women are able to cross over that Lakshman Rekha line. So that was sort of my paper, but I guess two other observations that I also noted was one, why so many Indian women who I know are, very forward thinking, very feminist, they're working women, great advocates, yet aren't financially independent. And that's something I've actually a conversation I've had with my own mother about, like, of course, joint bank accounts are convenient. But why is it always my dad's responsibility to do the taxes every year? Why is he the one's always like paying the bills for education and for utilities? And so like it's a burden for him, but also like shouldn't she have, or like want to have more say over the financial dependence? Like where do we, when we donate as a family, like even something as simple as which COVID organization are we donating to, and like having that financial independence. So yeah, those are some of like the lessons that I took away.
Yeah, thank you, Ayushi. And that is like very, very, I myself, for example, I can say that I am an independent woman. I'm financially independent, but I don't do, banking in my family. Like my husband does it. Most of the time, I just sign the papers, and many of my girlfriends said like that it shouldn't be that way. But I also was thinking what expectation I had when I was growing up. I was supposed to be smart. I was supposed to be able to recite home. My husband, my father worked with me, took great pride in the fact that I was a debater. I was participating in a speech competition and all that. However, there was not enough room for, I cannot speak for everyone, but many of us to become street smart. So yes, my academic success was celebrated in my family. But if it was 8 o'clock in Lucknow and I needed a particular book, my brothers asked to go and buy that book for me. Right. So I was like performing on the stage that was given to me. But unlike Navjeet, I did not have privilege to go and live on my own. So, and I was thinking whether that has something to do with not as many Indian women working. In comparison to their qualification, there are less number of women who are working. A lot of highly educationally qualified women are not working. Two things, I personally think it's connected with two issues. One is have higher responsibility to work at home and take care of the household. That's one thing. In my case, I cannot complain about that because my husband does most of the household work. But for example, like banking, for example, even like choosing pension programs and things like that, I just find personally very very overwhelming. And when I was talking to other women, it seems like we are less trained, we are less exposed, and we in doing those things. Again, it can be very limited observation, but this has been my observation, but that in the end makes us less empowered, as Ayushi said. And so I am kind of I'm in the same situation. And not that it was imposed on me by an Indian man, because I just found it easier not to take care of the finances. It's easier for me to make money, but not take care of taking care of them. So this candid conversation, we are putting everything out there. So now I'm going to, is it okay to open the floor for the audience? So please raise your hand or type if you want to ask a question. And meanwhile, I would share about one study which is very interesting. So a couple of years ago, a research-based, data analysis-based, survey research-based study came out that this research, researchers went to different countries, Middle Eastern, African, and Asian, and asked men there whether they want their women to work. Would they like their women to have like their profession? They would want to have working women. And then they asked women, do you want to work? And according to the study, in most countries, almost all countries, there were always like around like 15-20% higher percentage of women who said they wanted to work. And there were less men in those societies who said that they would like their women to work, or they think that their women need to work. In India, interestingly, such a huge country, results were reversed. Low 50% women said that, yes, they think that it's important for them to work. High 70% Indian men said they would like their women to work, right? And so this question can be very important for Rima. So what impact does this situation have on personal relationships? Does it mean that in many other countries, Middle Eastern countries and African countries, particularly Middle Eastern countries, there are like this number of women not happy, not satisfied because they want to work and they cannot work? But in India, is it the situation that there are a huge number of men, Indian men, who want or who secretly would like their women to work, who secretly feel burdened by this expectation that they have to not only provide to submissive women of early 20th century who were happy in sarees on one gold piece of jewelry in a year, every Karwa Chauth or Eid. But now women who think that they are educated, they want Michael Kors bag, they want to go shopping and kitty party and whatnot, and but they are not as interested in working. And I actually posted this on my Facebook, and many of my sisters just attacked me. Why do you think that working itself makes you empowered? I believe that it does guarantee that you are more in power if you're working. Navjeet has already put this out there that you might still be doing the dishes and washing your boyfriend's, forget about husband's shirt. But it does make it easier to walk out from a bad relationship. Like some strong women would do that anyways, but it just makes it a little easier. And I do feel like, as human beings, we be contributing to the family, the society, whether by cooking rotis or working or bringing money or doing whatnot. So I'm just being devil's advocate. I'm sister, but I'm putting it out there for you guys and girls. So with that, anybody wants to respond to that? Please respond. Meanwhile, I will see who wants to talk.
Anita,
Kavya and Anita have something. Kavya, you are, so let's see what Kavya has to say, and then we can chime in. So Kavya somebody should give microphone right to Kavya. Hi, Kavya.
Hi, guys. I just want to kind of talk about how there's a very big difference between I see between men in India and American Indian men. Mm-hmm. And my experience with men largely, and when I say men, I speak for my age group. So I'm 20. I'm going to be 22, so early 20s. there is such a big difference between how we are treated in India by men and in America by Indian men who were born and raised here. I currently go to Rutgers, so I went to elementary school here. I'm now in college here. I've worked here. I work in India, and I went to school there. And I think it really boils down to something really, really simple, which is just respect. And there is just a fundamental difference in what makes you respectable in these two places. And often you can't reconcile because either in one place you're respectable and the other place you're not. So here, you're encouraged to be, you're getting good grades, you're killing it, you're going out into the workplace, that garners respect. You're doing things, you're inspiring people, you're speaking your mind. But that doesn't garner too much respect when you're in India. When I was in college in India and I was speaking my mind, I was ridiculed for talking too much, for maybe made people insecure. And so instead of respect, the response was insecurity. And that maybe even whatever little respect there kind of diminishes there. So I just think in even gender roles, right? Like what is expected, what is not expected. I'm in a relationship with a Indian man who was raised here, born and raised, right? And all the things I hear about, what you're expected to do, what you're not. He loves doing the dishes. I hate doing the dishes. He always does them. And if he cooks and I cook, we clean together. It's fun. We do chores together. Like there's no expectation of, you do this, so I do this. There's no give and take. Everything isn't really about give and take all the time. It's this overall sense of balance without having a list of, okay, you did this, so I have to do this. You did this, but you didn't do this, and now I resent you for that. Right? And I think that really lacks with men in India because what I feel like they're still working towards that blurring, in the private, the public. They're not sure what it means to have a more successful partner. They're not sure what it means to have a partner kind of talk about and tell them wrong when maybe they were raised by mothers who always told them they were right. And it's that confusion that is leading to a lot of the dynamic between my experience with women and men. They're honestly confused. They don't know what to do, how to think. They enter college and there's this whole feminism discourse that they've never been introduced to before. They don't know how to react to it, so they react to it either with curiosity or hostility or resentment or just fear, right? That's why the whole thing is, if you're a feminist, they want to talk to you, right? Because they're scared of it. They don't know what it means for them. And here it's less scary because they're like, oh, so what? Things take for granted here in the United States are such big deals over there, right? There's discourse about it. There are papers written about it. But here it's like, okay, so big deal. This is like normal everyday life, which is, I think, why the whole thing about the private and public, it being a more public movement in the United States, because in a lot of situations, people take it for granted that the private life is already like that, right? Because, the feminist movement in America started a lot earlier on than it did here in the more traditional sense that we're talking about, getting women in the workplace, getting women
not that they don't want to help their wife. They just don't know how to. So if seeing a lot of problems in terms of how our, at least like I'm, our brothers, our friends were raised. And but you're talking about like dating and this heterosexual relationship among young women. So I would just like to share something with you. So I was having this discussion with a lot of young women about like how Indian men, particularly because I took my entire class to India, and what I did was, it turned out to be very productive. The first thing I did was hosted a get-together party, a get-together youth party. So I invited a lot of young men and women to the institute where I was hosting this seminar, and just said, okay, just mingle. And that was a good, and in my entire class, in my entire course, Ayushi Sinha, who just talked, she was the only Indian American woman. The entire class was non-Indian. It was like Black women, women from Latin America, European, white women from European background, gay men. It was that kind of group. Ayushi was the only girl. So it was very interesting. So they noted, right? Because, and it was funny. It was like my intention was not to collect data. It just happened. My intention was to not take my students to show in India Gate and this and that and have the same conversation between me and them with some other feminist scholars, because then what's the point of immersion, right? So in order to immerse them into Indian culture, I hosted a party. And then my students started receiving 11 p.m., 12 p.m., social media messages. And I had to be on defensive because also as an Indian woman, I was convinced, and I am still convinced, that not all of these guys were like bad guys. They were not necessarily, all of them were hitting on my students. But it appeared. That's why in the beginning I said, we are talking how you guys appear to Indian women and other women. So it might be helpful for you as well. It's not so much that we are making judgment that you are bad, you don't want to help. It's just like, it's some other women, your moms maybe didn't raise you this way. So, and then when we went back and then we started having conversation, and my students were very, candid. They were not offended. It all went well. Nothing bad happened. But then we were talking about aggressive, how Indian men are a little more aggressive when they pursue women, right? And how all these movies make our men like that. But then, just to share with you, Kavya, some American women, they were started lamenting. They said, oh yeah, I mean, I could see that these guys were like a bit aggressive, and that was funny, but it was kind of interesting. And then they said, oh, we are having another, very difficult problem. They are too lazy here, men and lovers and boyfriends, and particularly in pursuing you, in approaching you, men in America are too lazy. They don't put enough effort in pursuing you. So the whole, because I teach sexuality, so sexuality is, of course, there has to be consent, there to be right, but there has to be pleasure, there has to be playfulness. So, but what I heard, that there's not playfulness. I don't know. Even when I married an American man, I did it in India. Right. So, and he was culturally proficient in Indian culture. So he knows Sanskrit, he knows Hindi. So that is not a typical case of dating. I'd never dated an American woman. I dated an Indianized American man. But just putting it out there, that there is, and then I see I'm part of an American family, and I see there is different kind of pressure to be in order to show that you are equal. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but even I am not really trained in terms of being as active as I'm expected to be active by American culture. Let's put it this way. And I mentioned that how I found myself acting differently when I'm interacting with Indian men and American men. And one example is this: I really noticed about myself, and I thought, that's like embarrassing. So, Kavya, it's very common. You just go and they're like, you just like, you say hello by hugging people, right? A very superficial kind of hello hug. And so I go, and they can be my colleagues, can be, other friends, and I go to parties and conferences, and then I very casually, without any hint of self-consciousness, without a hint of anything, it's like I give plain hugs to non-Indian men. And I found, and then suddenly there is an Indian man I know from Lucknow, and I never hugged this man. I never touched this man. I never even probably shook hands with this man. And then I pause, and it's awkward. Sometimes I don't hug them, and it seems like it's awkward. Like I'm like hugging I'm discriminating against Indian. I'm hugging non-Indian men, not hugging Indian men. And then I awkwardly try to hug, and there is this awkwardness, and the guy is also feeling awkward. So I'm just candid conversation. This is like very, very, so it is more about conditioning. Basically, that's what all coming out of it.
Just to put it on the flip side, if you're more aggressive in your approach, or if your students, any of the female students, were ever more aggressive in their approach, there's a difference between how, yes, okay, men are more aggressive, but if the situation was flipped, we don't make assumptions about an aggressive man and what he wants and what he can do and what he's willing to do and who he is as a human being. We don't sit and judge them like that. We're just like, oh, that's a little bit much. Tone it down or whatever, right? They thought it was funny. If I was aggressive, which I have been in multiple situations, I get labeled all kinds of things, right? Yeah. And we don't do that. We don't label men by their aggression. But on the flip side, I've been labeled terrible things. Sometimes I'm too forward. They assume things I'm ready to do. They don't know what, and I haven't said a word in regards to anything, whether it's my sexuality, whether it's how I am as a, potential partner, nothing, none of that conversation.
Yes, so Aarti is saying exactly the same thing. Why can't women pursue, men in this age? And exactly what you're saying. But the thing is, if you are aggressive, we say that, oh, they are aggressive. But at the same time, we have every right to be aggressive, but we are, at least I can talk about myself. Like I'm like more self-conscious. There is this fear that to be judged, you're too easily available, you're too accessible and all of that. Right? So that judgment is more among Indian men. And then, but the funny thing is, I don't know what they want, but if they are aggressive and they want, kind of like, reciprocal relationship, but at the same time, there is this fear, then they're not getting 100% of the women they are interacting with. So I completely agree with the Kavya.
May I respond to that, Fozia?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to get...
You're the best.
No. Sorry, Navjeet, were you saying something? Was Navjeet saying?
Both have comments to make as well, but you also have...
Rima, you go, and then I don't know.
Are you sure?
But I will ask. Yeah.
Okay. Is that okay? Okay. I mean, I can think of one way to respond to all of the conversation we've been having for the past 10 minutes. And the logical way to explain this kind of fractured behavior is that no other culture in modern times has seen this drastic fast forward change from a very gendered society where male roles were very, very well defined and female roles were very, very well defined, and both males and females had a certain kind of power in their own very, very gendered spaces, to this, fast forward in like 20 years, even in say like 2 generations, or from the generation of my mother to my generation, which is what some 30 years, it's a complete flip where women were ruling the roost at home. Because especially in North Indian Muslim households, we have this very, very strict concept of the zanana and the mardana. And the mardana or the mard dare not, poke their noses in the affairs of the zanana, what is being cooked, what's being made, what festivals, how much expense on clothes, this, that, blah, blah, blah. And women didn't want to. Did not have the space to interfere in, well, are you going hunting or not? Okay, so how many people are we having for dinner? That was something that was considered very, very mardana and something that was dealt with in the betak or politics. So both spheres very strong in their own gendered roles, from where I'm coming from. And you fast forward in 20, 25 years to a space where women are a leap ahead. Women are inhabiting both the quote-unquote male spaces and female spaces, whereas the men are still stuck pretty much in their own space. So you see where the conflict is. The conflict is that the gap that has been bridged over, say, one more generation or two more generations from when the feminist movement started to now in places like America or England, we haven't had that kind of time yet. So you have men who are daunted by this modern Indian woman who can earn, who can pay their own rent, who can walk out of relationships, who is also yet expected to, maybe even wants to inhabit the domestic space because that's what she's used to, because she is also herself navigating whether she wants to or doesn't want to. Because for most Indian women, this is also a very, for the lack of a better word, a very bipolar, a very schizophrenic state. Just not labeling like that, but, just completely crazy, where you're expected to be top of your boardroom, the perfect mom, look very good, be top of the parent team, be very, very like involved, cool mom, or I need to be on all the parents group, on all the parents WhatsApp groups and this group and that group. And I also want to be known as a good homemaker who's also baking, who's also decorating. So there is this plethora or these different sides to a woman's personality that are being simultaneously explored, that are being simultaneously expressed, but not enough room when you look at it. The men are still stuck in that one role, the breadwinner, the person who brings the money home. Where is the space for him? Where is the time for him being given to explore all of these other roles, therefore to understand himself better, to express himself better, and also come to terms with this new kind of woman who's everything. And the man is not everything yet. And the man, what that makes him feel is, I'm generalizing here, but, just bear with me. What that makes him feel is insecure. I am not enough, too pressured. I am the only one who has to look after the money, the finances. All of this burden is on my shoulder. Whereas the woman, if she's bringing in her money, I have no right on it. Because if I say to her that, you're earning to, why don't you contribute to the household expenses? You're the man. It's your job. It's your responsibility. I've been to corporate offices where young men have come up to me and said, you know what, we're just so tired. I don't want to be this man anymore. I want to put down the burden of responsibility for once and not be expected to be this very, very stoic, emotional, financially capable, everything capable person who has no room to vent. Where is my room to vent? And what's that doing is it's creating such a lot of pressure, which leads to aggression inside the bedroom, which leads to aggression in private spaces, which leads to aggression on the street. Because you have this guy from, say, for lack of a better example, somewhere in Western UP who's come to study in Delhi. So for the first time in his life, he's confronted by women who are owning the street and who are working and who are studying and who know how to speak their mind. And the only thing he knows is to study or to earn money. And he's like, I don't know how to talk to this woman. So either I will shun her, or I'll hurt her, or I'll libel her. Those are the three responses. So maybe that can explain what you're saying, Kavya, because that's what I consistently see. Even as a mom, I see it, and as a single mother, a single woman, I've seen it. Because when I was in that space of a very easily categorized space of wife and homemaker I wasn't working for the longest time when my son was young, and not somebody who talked about things like sex and sexuality in the open. Men found it easier to, जैसे कहना है ना कि हजम कर लेते हैं, औरतें भी हजम कर लेती थी. Okay, so this is an easily categorized person. But when I changed tracks and I started becoming and vocally talking about who I am, before I gave myself the label of an intimacy counselor and coach, men either responded in a very sleazy way, oh, so you're a sexuality educator, because that's what I was before. That's the correct term, actually. But, oh, you're a sexuality educator. Aap Kama Sutra sikhati hai. I mean, these are things that people have actually said to me. They've texted to me, कि आप ये वाली position सिखाती हैं. So I did a talk on that also. And also women, oh, ये sex के बारे में बात करती है. You know, Musliman and, you know, respectable family. Oh my God, she talks about all of this. So, you know, being judged from across the spectrum. And I'm single hai, divorced hai, you know, I want to keep my husband safe from her. I've had, I'm not kidding you, you know, keep my days. Anyone's husband, red flag, oh my God, save that guy. So that kind of thing. So we are still in a state of flux. Yeah. We are still moving. And there's so much more needs to be explored with nuance and with sensitivity, I say. Now, one of the things that Kavya said was about the whole boys' locker room, you know, the controversy that has happened. You have to look at where it's coming from. These are also children. 15, 16, having worked this long in child sexual abuse awareness and prevention, you know, there's one thing that we do not pay enough attention to is there is no consistent background education on consent, on personal boundaries, on independent sexual space, on how to talk to each other. You've got these huge co-ed educational institutions where boys and girls are made to sit separately, they're made to go to swimming classes separately, they're made to go to gym classes separately. You expect them to mingle, but you're not teaching them how to mingle.
Thank you, Rima. I think you concluded it so well that you know, we since we are venting out, it seems like problem is ours, right? But there are a lot of issues because of this sudden change in how the society is organized as well for men as well. I mean, I mentioned my dada and my father, they went to work late, early, and then there was a, you know, woman clad in sari presenting chai to them, and then now these, you know, the whole corporate world, they go early, come back at 11, and then they and then the entire family gets some takeout dinner. So I'm seeing all of these things happening, and it's not just about gender. Very sudden change in lifestyle itself is overwhelming to many of the families, and the relationship between men and women, whether it is you know, romantic, sexual, or in other familial relationship, is suffering because of that. I would definitely take a few not just questions, but give the microphone right to Ram. Ram wants to talk, and Anil is here. Anil, if you want to talk.
Ayushi wanted to, and Anita wanted to. So we have 4 in line.
Okay, yeah. So let's just let them talk.
Yeah,
Ram, you are.
Not that I wanted to talk, but I wanted to ask a question. But, yeah. Fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate the frankness and the honesty of what you're saying. And I guess my question is, you know, this is clearly a complex situation.